Good morning. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to our guests. I thank you for being here. I'd like to begin by saying, has anyone already bought Pastor's new book? Pastor has a new book out. It's his very first book. It's on the book of Revelation. Revelation is a hard book to study, hard book to read. I've read it many times, had college courses on it. But if you would like a better understanding on the book of Revelation, I don't know if we have a picture of it, but the book is called Revelation Revealed, and you can find it on Amazon. And it's the first volume. There's 2 volumes. The first volume's out, and the second one will be out in a couple weeks. I challenge you, or I ask you to grab hold of that and read that. You will understand Revelation in a greater way and in a better way. Pastor's already starting on another book. I think is it John, the next one? He's going to be doing volumes on John and then Romans. Romans, another hard read. So Pastor's on fire, and he's putting out some books. And Pastor, of course, he's my dad. I see him every day, and he has put it at a price, not to make money, but for you to have the information. So these volumes are like $10 or $12, and most of it just pays for the printing and the shipping. So I encourage you, Revelation Revealed. I don't know if we have a picture of it. I'll get you a copy next week to show you. I think we had one on the slide. But in John 10:10, Jesus is speaking to the disciples and those that are around him. And in John 10:10, he says, it's the thief that comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. It's the thief that comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. Who's the thief? We know it's not God, because God owns everything. God's created everything. God owns everything. It is the devil. And his demons is the demonic. And it is him that comes to kill and to steal and to destroy. So sickness, disease is what takes people's lives, right? So it is not God that gives disease. It is not God that gives sickness, because he is not a thief. Jesus says this, the thief comes to kill, to steal, and destroy. And he says, I have come to give you life and to have it to the full, or to have it more abundantly. Jesus says, I have come to give you life, to bring you life, and that more abundantly. Title of my message is Life, Not Death. And Jesus still interrupts funerals. Jesus still interrupts funerals. Jesus brings hope to the hopeless. That first song that we saw on the video, CeCe Winans was speaking, and I wrote this down while she was singing. In her song, she said, hope is never lost. God has a final say. Jesus brings hope to the hopeless, and Jesus still interrupts funerals. Luke 7:11. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, as she was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. I'm going to stop there for a minute. Jesus is taking a large crowd with him to Nain, and they intercept a large crowd as part of the funeral procession. Whenever you see the word large crowd, it is more that can be counted. Because in other scriptures, you'll see, in the upper room, there was 120. It was easy to count 120. There was other places in the Bible where they would have numbers and they would count the crowd. But when it says a large crowd, it is like him feeding the 5,000 or the 4,000. It is a crowd that cannot be numbered. So both of these are large crowds. Let's go back to verse 12. It says, as he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, don't cry. And he went up and touched the funeral bier. It's pronounced either bier or bier. But that word touched is translated that he took hold of the corner of that cot, of that stretcher. It says he actually grabbed hold of the corner of it and said, stop. Because a funeral in Jewish custom was never supposed to stop. And even in today's society, when you see a funeral, you'll see the police come through the intersection, and what do? They block the intersection so that the funeral procession never stops. Once they leave the church, they don't stop until they get to the cemetery, right? So that comes from this tradition. So once the funeral procession starts, it cannot be stopped, according to tradition, until they get to the gravesite. But Jesus comes and he lays hold of the corner of that cot where that dead man is laying, and he abruptly stops the procession. He went and touched or laid hold of the funeral bier. They were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to his people. This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. A few facts that we need to understand about this. She is a widow, so she's lost her husband. And now she's lost her only son. So now she's desolate. And without her son or her husband to bring in money from either farming or working in the city, she's about to lose her house. She's about to lose her land. She's about to become homeless. And she understands that pretty much her life is over because of what has happened. But Jesus refused to accept that death was irreversible or final. And we need to be the same way. We do not need to accept that death is final or that it is not irreversible. Jesus, gives them a second chance. He brings hope to the hopeless. Luke 7:14, we're going to go back to this one line. It says, then he went up and he touched the funeral bier or bier, however you want to pronounce it. They were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. Would you show a picture of this? I've got a picture up here of what it would have looked like that day as Jesus met them at the city gate. He would have been, the dead man, the young son, would have been laying on what you see here, and he would have been covered in fabric. And Jesus would have laid hold to one of those staffs that's holding that young man, that body of that young man. So to get you a picture of what Jesus encountered and what we would have seen on that day, this is what you would have seen. And there was a great crowd with him, with both of them. I was wondering as I read the scripture, why didn't he touch the dead man? Why didn't Jesus touch the dead man? It says he laid hold of what you see here, of the corner. He didn't touch the dead man because of the law. Numbers 19:11. Whoever touches a human corpse will be unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves with the water on the third day, and on the seventh day, then they will be clean. But if they do not purify themselves on the third and seventh days, they will not be clean. If they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse, they defile the Lord's tabernacle. They must be cut off from Israel because the water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on them. They were unclean. They are unclean. Their uncleanness remains on them. Now, hang with me for a minute, okay? Because I know when he touches, whatever he touches comes to life, okay? But I want to show you something. Because I went back to Elisha the prophet, when he raised the widow's son. See, in 2 Kings 4:32, Elisha raises the widow's son from the dead. It said when Elisha reached the house, there was the boy laying down on his couch or his bed, Elisha's bed. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and laid on top of the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out on him, the boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got out on the bed and stretched out on him once before. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. What's the difference? See, Elisha touched the boy, but what happens to Elisha, according to Numbers? He's unclean for a little while, okay? What's the difference? Jesus had to fulfill the law for us. Elisha was under the law, but wasn't sent to fulfill the law. Numbers 19:11, whoever touches a corpse, a human corpse, will be unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves with the water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day they will be clean. I'm going to go through this again because I want you to understand how much has to be done to purify yourself. But if they do not purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th day, they will not be clean. If they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse, they defile the Lord's tabernacle. They must be cut off from Israel because of the water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on them. They are unclean. Their uncleanness remains on them. Jesus couldn't break the law because he had to fulfill the law. So he did not touch this human corpse because he would have broken the law. And I'm going to tell you something about the devil. The devil keeps the law, or keeps up with the law. The devil watches when we break the law, okay? He is always watching because he knows if he has a legal right to you. And so when we break rules and we disobey and we sin, that's when he comes in and has a foothold and says, he can look at the Lord and say, look, they broke the law. I have a place in them. I have a foothold in them. I have a right to them. So Jesus, knowing this, see, Satan is watching Jesus too. He knows where Jesus is the act in town. Jesus is the Son of God. So the devil would have come to him and said, look, Lord, he broke the law. If Jesus would have touched this young man, even though he raised him from the dead, legally, the right would have been, he broke the law. So Jesus lays hold of the corner of the cot or the funeral bier and says, stop the procession. I'm not going to break the law. I'm going to raise this boy from the dead because I have to fulfill the law. Why did Jesus go to Nain? It's the beginning of our story. Nain is only mentioned one time in the Bible, and it is only mentioned because Jesus went there. You will find Nain one time. Now, Jesus is in Capernaum. I've been there. Many of you have been to Israel. You've been to Capernaum. It is where Jesus, in this story, has just healed the centurion's servant. Remember this story of the centurion? He says, I understand you're a Jew and I'm a Gentile, and it is not right for you to come under my roof, but if you'll just speak the word, I understand authority, he says. If you just speak the word, I know my servant will be healed. And Jesus spoke the word, and his servant was healed. And he says to all those around, he says, I've never seen faith like this in all of Israel. And he's talking to all the Jews. And he said, this man's a Gentile, and he has more faith than all of you guys. It is only mentioned one time, Nain. So Jesus is about to leave Capernaum to go to Nain. Why? Jesus told us in the Bible, I only do what I see the Father doing. I only say what I hear the Father saying. In other words, the Father was drawing him to Nain. His next mission, his next miracle, his next work is in Nain. Now, Nain is 30 miles. 30 miles from Capernaum to Nain. Now, I want to give you some perspective on 30 miles. It would be like you walking from Dothan to Chipley, Florida. That's 30 miles. Or, I'll give you another perspective. If you walked from Dothan to Blakely, Georgia, that's 30 miles. Now, that gives you some perspective of the journey, doesn't it? Now, there's something you need to understand. Capernaum is 600 feet below sea level. Nain is 700 feet above sea level. So this is a 1,300-foot difference in 30 miles. So when he leaves Capernaum, 600 feet below sea level, to go 30 miles, 700 feet, and see, Nain is on the foothill of a mountain. It's actually on the side of a mountain down at the bottom. So he is, in 30 miles, going to climb 1,300 feet. So each mile, he is ascending 43 feet for each mile. So the whole journey is uphill, 1,300 feet in 30 miles. I want to give you some perspective on this, okay? Jesus is walking with a large crowd uphill for 30 miles, from here to Blakely or from here to Chipley, okay? From Capernaum to Nain. And the large crowd stays with him the whole way. Think about the commitment of the large crowd, okay? It was an arduous uphill climb for 30 miles. In this story, if you read the story, it's only found, Nain's only found once in the Bible, there is no mention of any ministry along the way. Jesus went straight there, 30 miles. No one is healed along the way. No one is raised from the dead along the way, because it's a timing issue. Jesus has to be there on time because there's something about to happen in Nain. And so for 30 miles, think about this. For 30 miles, this large crowd stays with him. No miracles are done for 30 miles until he gets to Nain. During this time in Israel, people were buried on the same day or the next day after they died. So Jesus probably left Capernaum before the young man had even died. I want you to think about the timing of God. So before the man died, Jesus was already on his way. So before you need what you need, before you ask, before you plead, and before anything, the answer is already on the way. Matthew 6:8 tells us that God, your Father, knows what you need before you ask him. But it is up to us to ask him, right? So Jesus had to arrive at the perfect moment when the funeral procession was already underway, which means 30 miles Jesus had to leave before the young boy had died. He was actually an adult, a young adult, before the young son died. There's two questions that I want to ask, and as I thought about this story, was the mother crying out to God for her son? Has she been crying out all night? Has she laid on the dirt floor all night begging for her son's life? It doesn't tell us, but I know how a mother is. I know how mothers act, and I guarantee you a mother would have been crying out for her boy, crying out for her child. I know it because that's how mothers are. So while this young boy is still alive, but he's dying, his mother's crying out, and Jesus is already on the way. Jesus is on the way. The answer is already on the way. In the book of Daniel, actually in Daniel 10, I didn't give you the scripture, I'm just going to talk about it. You'll find it in Daniel 10:13. Daniel has cried out to the Lord for an answer. And for 21 days, he's been crying out and fasting. We call it a Daniel fast, where you eat just vegetables and no meats, no animal products. So for 21 days, he's been fasting and praying. And on the 21st day, the archangel, Michael, shows up to Daniel and says, I was dispatched the very first day you asked. And he said, but for 21 days, I've been fighting a principality. It's called the Prince of Persia. I've been fighting the Prince of Persia for 21 days. And I had to break through some spiritual junk. And I had to break through some spiritual principalities. I was dispatched on day one, but 21 days later, I'm here. And thank you, Daniel, for sticking with it. because you would have lost it if you would have given up on day 19 or day 20. But because you stayed 21 days, I was already on the way. Jesus was already on the way. The archangel Michael was already on the way to Daniel. And on the 21st day, he shows up and says, here's your answer. God heard you on the first day, but I had to break through some stuff. See, God's got to break through some stuff. The angels have to break through some stuff. You've asked for some things, wait for the 21st day. Because there's some principalities that have to be warred over. There's some things that have to be wrestled with. Don't give up on what God has promised you. Don't give up on the answer. Don't get to day 20 and say, well, I guess it's not going to work, because you just missed it. Luke 7:13. When the Lord saw her, this is the mother, his heart went out to her, and he said to her, don't cry. This is the compassion of Jesus. When you look at the scriptures and you look at Jesus' life, Jesus was always moved with compassion. Compassion is when you relate to someone's situation and you want to help them. So many of us through our lives have been moved with compassion. We see something and we want to fix it. We want to help. Do we have compassion? Think about us. Is our compassion active or is it passive? Even though we believe in resurrection, we believe life after death. Even though we believe in resurrection, there is still room for sorrow. Cry with those who lose loved ones. Sometimes Christians are almost calloused about death because they know the person is going to heaven. So cry with them. Yes, we know where they're going. And don't be callous to say, well, you know where he's going. What's wrong with you? They're grieving because for this moment, they're not going to see him or her again. And there's going to be an absence for weeks, years, until we are reunited again on that day. But cry with people. Hug people. Love people. That's what compassion is. Jesus knew he was going to raise this boy from the dead. He was already on the way. But what does he do? He has compassion on her. And he says, don't cry. Jesus knew he was about to raise the boy, raise the son. But yet he felt sorrow for the mother because she was hurting. Jesus felt sorrow at the tomb of Lazarus as well. Even though he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, he still cried. The shortest verse in the Bible, anybody know it? John 11:35. There it is. So if you want to memorize the scripture today, there it is. And then you could say, I've memorized scripture. Jesus wept. Why? When Jesus left to go to Lazarus, he knew he had died. He had waited extra days. And he gets there on purpose for this miracle to happen. He already told his disciples. The disciples are going there and they're like, hey, we're going to go to Lazarus' house. They went to Lazarus' house all the time. Lazarus and Martha and Mary were very good friends with Jesus. Jesus stayed in Bethany all the time. So Jesus was going to where he'd been many, 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 many times. So along the way, the disciples are talking with him and asking Jesus, and Jesus says, we're going to go see Lazarus. Because they're always asking, Jesus gets up and starts walking, and you just walk, and he's like, all right, Jesus, where are we going? Right? That's just Jesus. And so he said, we're going to go see Lazarus. He's very, very sick. And they said, well, if he's sick, then he's going to be okay. And he had said to them, Lazarus is sleeping. And so they kept on talking to Jesus about this. And finally, Jesus stops along the road and he says, no, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is dead. And that gives them a different perspective now. And I'm sure they got real quiet after that. Okay? Think about that. They're all chitty Cathys or whatever, chatty Cathys. And all of a sudden they're quiet, right? Because he said, Lazarus is dead. John 11:32. The reason Jesus wept is because he had compassion. He knew what he was going to do, but he had compassion. And never let us lose that point in our life. Never lose that in our Christianity, the compassion for people. We're going to raise people from the dead. Some of you in this room are going to raise people from the dead. But never lose your compassion. John 11:32, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, what happened? He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. That's compassion. When he sees her weeping and everyone else weeping, he already knows what he's going to do. Lazarus is about to come back to life. But what is he? He's moved with compassion because he feels what they feel. Where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Why? Because he feels what they feel. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more, was deeply moved with compassion of Christ. He came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid in front of the entrance. He says, take away the stone. See, you have to remove the stone. So many of us have put something away that we think is dead. And Jesus is saying, before I can do something for you, you have to remove the stone. I want to see your obedience to remove the stone. But Jesus, what's inside is dead. No, that's not what I asked. You remove the stone. Let me deal with what's past the stone. You remove the stone. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took the stone away. Jesus doesn't touch the stone. They took the stone away. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this, in other words, I'm praying not for my benefit, but for them, so that they can hear me praying. The people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Then he said this. Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Come forth. The dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. This is life invading death. I have come to give you life, and that more abundantly. John 10:10. I have come to give you life, and that more abundantly. When Jesus attended a funeral, he stopped it. He stopped every funeral he ever attended. He stopped the funeral of the daughter of Jairus. Mark 5:21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd, here we are again, a large crowd, gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. Now skip to verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead. They said, why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. See, this was a beginning of him just laying hands on a sick child. But now it's become a funeral. And now he is going to invade a funeral. And Jesus stops every funeral he has ever been a part of. Verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James, because you have to get rid of your unbelief. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, the people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he had put them all out, put the disbelief out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Jesus stopped every funeral he ever attended. And Jesus is on the way to Nain to stop another. When this young man died in Nain, so did the future of his family. He was her only son, and she was a widow. He would never get married. He would never have children. All of this mother's hopes and dreams died with him. I want you to picture something with me. I want you to think about the two groups of people. Jesus is leaving Capernaum with a large crowd. Jesus is the bridegroom, and the crowd is the bride. Think about this. The church is the bride of Christ, right? These are not Pharisees that are going with Jesus, because this is a 30-mile trek uphill, 1,300 feet uphill. These people love Jesus. They're full of joy. They're full of celebration. They're full of life and love for Jesus. So Jesus is the bridegroom. The crowd is the bride of Christ. So I want you to picture this crowd that's going to Nain as a wedding procession, because that's what it is. These people are committed to this journey, 30 miles uphill, up the side of a mountain. This is the wedding procession. Jesus, the bridegroom, with the bride of Christ, a large crowd. In our culture, let me back up. We back up to Revelation 19:7. Let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Fine linen and bright and clean was given to her to wear. Nain, I want to give you a description of Nain. Nain means green pastures. What does Psalm 23:2 tell us? He leads me through green pastures and beside still waters. Nain means green pastures, but he's about to confront a funeral procession at the gate of Nain. So for them, it's not a green pasture right now. But when life invades death, it becomes a green pasture again. In our culture, if you are driving along and you see a funeral procession, you are supposed to pull over out of courtesy and respect and let the whole procession pass. Anyone ever been a part of that? If you've lived in the South for more than a month, you have seen a funeral procession coming down the road. You see the lights of all the cars. You see the hearse. And so as a courtesy, you pull off the side of the road to let them pass, right? It's respect for what is happening. And then you get back on the road. According to Jewish tradition, if you intersected a funeral, you were obliged to join in. So we have a collision of two parades. A wedding procession, the bride of Christ and the bridegroom, Jesus and his people, Jesus and you, Jesus and his love, invading another parade. We have a collision of two parades. The question is, which parade will follow which? These people that had followed Jesus to Nain did so with joy. They were committed. This is a 30-mile uphill journey. So is this not joy in life invading death at the town gate? Why at the town gate? Because the town gate is where business and commerce is done. At the town gate, it's very significant that Jesus met them at the town gate, because that's where decisions are made, at the town gate. So Jesus had to leave before the young man had even died, 30 miles uphill, 1,300 feet in elevation, to meet them at the moment they're at the gate, on the funeral procession on the way to the graveyard. Two crowds crashed into one another, one full of joy as they followed Jesus, the other mourning as they prepared to bury their dead relative. And with a couple of words, Jesus is able to transform a funeral party into a party of celebration. So all of a sudden, guess what? The church grows. The celebration that was with Jesus for 30 miles, the bride of Christ that's with him for 30 miles, all of a sudden releases their joy into the funeral crowd. Jesus raises this boy from the dead, and the crowd is now doubled. And now it is a wedding procession. Any funeral Jesus invades turns into a celebration. Even his own. I'm going to show you something in just a second. Any funeral Jesus invades turns into a celebration, even his own. Because they didn't have time. Jesus was crucified and died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What time does it usually get dark? Depending on the time of year, right? Well, sometimes it gets dark here at 4:35, right? Sometimes it's a little bit later. But they had to get him down off the cross. He died at 3 o'clock. Joseph of Arimathea had to go to Pilate and ask for the body of Christ. So that takes a little more time. So even though he died at 3 o'clock, crucified, right? It's going to take time. Then they have to get him off the cross. They have to have him off the cross and buried before nightfall, because the Sabbath is coming. And at nightfall is the end of a day and the beginning of a new day. He cannot be on the cross when that happens. So they had no time for a funeral. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus get Jesus down off the cross. They clean him the best they can, all the blood. Nicodemus brings 75 pounds of perfume. Anybody like to wear perfume? Nicodemus was a very wealthy man. 75 pounds of perfume he put on Jesus. Think about that. That perspective, anybody ever have a dog? You have a 50-pound bag of feed? Think about 1.5 of those. Nicodemus brings 75 pounds of the best, most expensive spices and oils to put on Jesus. But there's no time for a funeral. They have to wrap him very quick, which takes time. And they have to put him in a tomb, which was Joseph's tomb, Joseph of Arimathea. It was a borrowed tomb. And they had to do this. There was no time for a funeral. Plus, there was nobody there for a funeral, right? What happened to his disciples? They all scattered, right? The only one at the cross was John, right? In Mark 16:1, if you'll hang with me, I want to show you something. In Mark 16:1, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome were there to anoint him and have a funeral. But Jesus had uninterrupted his own funeral. Mark 16:1, watch this. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought. See, I just caught this when I was doing this the other day. It's not brought, even though they did bring them. It says they bought spices so that they may go up to anoint Jesus' body. You all still with me? So I'm thinking to myself, They did not know that Jesus was going to be crucified. And when he was crucified and very hurriedly put into a tomb, the Sabbath was here. So there's no time to buy spices. It says they bought them. Now I want to give you, and it might mess up your theology a little bit, but you can go into the Gospels and you can find out that I'm telling you the truth. Jesus was crucified on a Thursday. And you can find two of the Gospels that tell you this. If you'll look at the timeline of what we call Palm Sunday, okay? Or we call it the triumphal entry into Jerusalem when Jesus rode the donkey, right? You can find in two of the Gospels what happened on Monday, what happened on Tuesday, and what happened on Wednesday. It's right there in the Bible. And I'm not going to give it all to you. I'm going to be like a professor I had in college. He would always leave you hanging so you'd go look it up. And so that's what I'm going to do for you. So on Thursday, you can look at the line, the chronological line in the Bible, Jesus was crucified. So why do we celebrate Good Friday? Good Friday started, and I've seen two different versions. Good Friday started either in the 7th century or the 14th century by the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church began Good Friday as a time of celebration. But that's really not when Jesus was born. Crucified, when Jesus was crucified. Because Jesus told them before he died, just like Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days, so must the Son of Man be in the belly of the earth for 3 days. So if he died on a Friday evening and rose on a Sunday, is that 3 days? There's no way. No way. It's like a day and a half, 2 days. So he died on Thursday. He was crucified on Thursday. Now, if he died on Thursday, how could Friday be a Sabbath? Because Saturday is really the Sabbath. Are you still with me? Because Sunday is the new day. Sunday is the new week, okay? Stay with me. Twice a year, there was a high Sabbath. You'll find this in John 19, okay? And also once every 7 years, what was called a high Sabbath or a high day. Twice a year, and they would fall at different times. You'll only find this in John because John said the next day when they put Jesus in the tomb, they had to do it quickly because the next day was a high Sabbath. See, a high Sabbath is a normal Sabbath is never called a high Sabbath. They're two different Sabbaths. So on this weekend, there was a double Sabbath. The word is Sabbaton. So Jesus was crucified on Thursday. They put him in the tomb that evening before the sun went down because they had to, because the next day was a high Sabbath. Then we have Saturday, the regular Sabbath. Okay? Everybody with me? Now, how did these young ladies, or these women, buy spices during this time? So I researched this. See, a Jewish day ends at sundown. So on Saturday night at sundown, that Sabbath is over. And the city, the merchants would open back up after it got dark. So between the time of sundown and Jesus in the morning when they went to the tomb, okay, bear with me. That evening when the Sabbath was over, the regular Sabbath, the merchants would have opened their shops for a few hours before it got late. And people could buy their food, buy their spices, and buy anything they wanted. But at sundown, the gates of the city are always closed at sundown. So even though they could go and buy their spices at sundown, the gates of the city are closed at sundown. Remember the story of Jesus? Jesus was crucified where? Outside the city gates. Jesus was buried where? In a garden tomb outside the city. So even though they bought spices Saturday evening after the Sabbath was over, they could not leave the city because the gates had been closed because it was dark. So they had to wait till Sunday morning. So at Sunday morning at daylight, guess what happens? The gates of the city are opened for commerce. And here they are, they've bought the spices. That's when they bought them, the night before. And here they are on their way to the tomb. Mark 16, verse 2. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. We know this is an angel. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where you laid him? Where they laid him? But go tell the disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." In Luke 24:4, the angel asked these women, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" What he was really asking them is, why are you here for a funeral? Why are you looking for the living among the dead? The angel's asking these women who come with spices, why are you here for a funeral? God has resurrected his son. He has brought him back to life. But these women are still carrying spices for a funeral. See, spices were used to preserve a body from decay. And the spices that they bought and they brought are not needed. Spices cover up the smell of what is dead, but they don't resurrect what is dead. They are temporary. Spices are temporary. They are a cover. Jesus promised them all that in 3 days he would come back to life. He told them 21 times in the scriptures, "I'm coming back. The third day I'm coming back." 21 times. If the praise team will come up. Y'all stick with me. I want to do something here at the end. That's why you see in the back. But watch me and listen to me. What promises has God given us that we are still carrying unneeded spices around for? Did you hear me? What promises has God given us that we are still carrying unneeded spices around for? Jesus is still interrupting funerals. Would you put that last name up there? This man, Daniel Ekechukwu. This is a remarkable story of a Nigerian pastor named Daniel Ekechukwu, who was fatally injured in a car accident near the town of Onitsha, Nigeria, Africa, on November the 30th, 2001. During a dramatic journey to a hospital in Owerri, Nigeria, he lost all life signs and was later pronounced dead by 2 different medical staff in 2 different hospitals. The second hospital wrote a medical report and commissioned his corpse to the mortuary. But Daniel's wife remembered a verse in Scripture from Hebrews 11. Women receive their dead raised to life again. She heard about a meeting where evangelist Reinhard Bonnke was going to preach, and proceeded by bringing Daniel's body in his coffin. Reminds me of Nain, doesn't it? In his coffin. Some believers gathered around Daniel's body and prayed while Reinhard Bonnke, who knew nothing of the dead body, was in the basement, preached and prayed. So we have Reinhard Bonnke preaching and praying upstairs, and the body of a dead man in the basement underneath the stage. Eventually, it was noticed that Daniel's corpse, Daniel's body, twitched, and then irregular breathing started. The believers began praying fervently, and because his body was stiff and cold, they began massaging his neck, his arms, and his legs. When those in the sanctuary got word that a dead man below was coming back to life, the basement room was soon jammed with people. Suddenly, Daniel sneezed and rose with a jump. It was somewhere between 3:50 and 5:15 p.m. on Sunday morning. Daniel had died Friday night. He had been dead for 2 days. Jesus is still interrupting funerals. Do not take what a doctor says to you as the final word, because God has the final say. Don't keep carrying spices for something God is about to resurrect. Don't keep carrying spices that only cover when God is about to bring something back to life in your life. Spices are a cover, but they have no power. Spices are temporary. Resurrection is eternal. If you'll stand with me. God can change anything. Anything. God has the final say. My question to you is, do you want to be changed? Have you put something in a tomb in your life and said, there's no hope for this? And you rolled a stone in front of it because you don't want to smell it. And you're carrying spices hoping that something might happen. Can I say something to you? I want you to roll that stone away, because Jesus is coming up to the mouth of that cave in your life. And when he speaks life into it, whatever's in there is going to resurrect and come back to life. God can change anything, but you have to want to be changed. We are going to celebrate